Santosh will give you that introduction, read over that introduction, and then we'll get into the interview. Sounds good?
Sure.
Thank you. So you ready? Everything queued up, Santosh? Recording, side-by-side mode?
Yeah, I'm double checking. Everything looks
check.
good. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. We're here for another amazing edition of the Etiquette Show on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. We have an amazing guest today, Rabbi Rishon, we're going to be talking about the Jewish experience as it pertains to racism and other related areas. So take it away, Santosh.
Rabbi Shais Rishon, aka Manishtana, is an award-winning novelist, writer, and speaker whose work takes prejudice, bias, and ignorance head-on with a humorous and often irreverent voice that shatters the misconceptions of Orthodox Judaism, American Jewish racial identity, and African American religious identity with gut-punching insights and gut-busting sarcasm. A contributor to the recent anthology, Jewish Priorities, 65 Proposals for the Future of Our People, he is the author of Ariel Sampson, Freelance Rabbi, a 2018 Jewish Book Council Awards finalist for debut fiction, and the upcoming Biheish Shehorha in Blackfire, an anthology and commentary on the Torah, due in fall 2024. Welcome to the show, Rabbi. It's an honor to have you here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Welcome to the show, Rabbi Rishon. It's a distinct honor, especially as myself being a so-called Jew of color, to have your sort of insights and perspectives on terms of racism, because I've been sort of nominated, so to speak, to be on a committee of Jews of color, and in which we're sort of talking about how to deal with racism and as it pertains to the community. And this is definitely what we wanted to get your insights on. One of the experiences which I wanted to get your insights on particularly is that as somebody who is Jewish and going to various Jewish events, one thing which I find, which I believe you've kind of touched on before in sort of one of your interviews, is when you go to a Jewish community event, you are approached, and usually in a polite way, at least from my experience, and then you're constantly having to justify yourself, explain your heritage. You can tell that by their eyes are looking at you like, is this guy a convert? Why is he here? And stuff like that. And which leads to my sort of supplement. It's that in terms of, what is your sort of, to a necessary question is that, if you were, Catholic, if you were an imam, if you were a pastor, people wouldn't question, okay, you're black and you're an imam, you're black and you're, Catholic, you're black and you're a pastor. But to start off this interview, we'll inevitably, for people who are Jewish or not Jewish, have to go into what is your background, what is your Jewish identity, and could you also shed light on sort of your background for the benefit of, not for me, because I don't like that question being asked of me, but for people out there who are like the skeptics. So I don't know who this guy is. Is he an Israelite, or what is this guy anyway? So can you go to touch on sort of racism in general, and a little bit about your background just for people out there?
Well, one reason why I'm fine answering these kinds of questions is because this is specifically a space I inhabit for that purpose. So just because I'm answering this question for your audience members, that doesn't give you free license to just walk up on any random Jew of color that you encounter and expect to be entitled to the answers to the questions that you're asking. I'm having a very specific space to answer those questions to sort of alleviate that when you encounter your next Jew of color. So me personally, born and bred, Orthodox, grew up Chabad, Crown Heights before, during, after the riots. Both my parents are African American, Jewish, and Orthodox. On my mother's side, we've been here as African American Jews since we first arrived in this country sometime in the 1780s. So we're also more American than most Americans are. Went to public school. Why? Because the yeshiva sort of environments in the 80s wasn't necessarily a very racially friendly place. So all Jewish knowledge and textual basis, knowing how to learn for bar mitzvah, read Torah, lead services, all learned that from home, and just went to public schools because sadly I've experienced more racism in mainstream Jewish spaces than I ever have anti-Semitism in Black non-Jewish spaces. So that's why the work I've been doing for the past 15 years is addressing race and religion and how those identities tend to intersect and manifest, particularly in the environment of American Judaism.
One of the things, which is just a sort of an anecdote, is that, I saw that you went to a school, James Madison High School. I went to a public school called James Madison in Indiana.
Oh,
wow. That was kind of a little bit of a side
coincidence.
Well, I also saw that, Rabbi, you also started a community center for Jews of color. Is that because there has been sort of incidences that yourself or other people are experiencing going to the regular so-called mainstream community centers that necessitated starting such a community center for Jews of color?
Unfortunately, there was a pre-COVID sort of endeavor with me and Mitz Jordan, better known as Wylove. So we're semi-glad that never got off the ground because it was just before the pandemic, and so that just would have been a horrible space to have a public space, something that thrives on a public social interaction just before public social interaction had to be shut down. Mm-hmm. But that was the general sort of impetus behind where there isn't, there's no, Jewish Federation sort of, for Jews of color. There's no institutional, sort of bodies that are sort of Jew of color spaces. There are nonprofits, like there's Jews in Al Hughes, there's JLCI, there's Chak Mishpacha, Almud, but when it comes to a physical space where we can congregate and not have to, go through those questions that other Jews don't have to when attending a Jewish event or being, again, in a Jewish space where they can just show up and just be Jews, where we have to show up and explain why we're in the space and we just don't get to enjoy it the way everyone else does. So that was, again, the sort of core impetus behind, creating that sort of space. So currently those plans are, on pause and on hold, and hopefully they'll come to fruition at some future point.
So with that in mind, what do you feel, as someone who's experienced racism as a Black person, as someone Jewish, what in your view is the driving force or origin of this perpetuated environment of racism that we experience as of Jews of color? Where is it coming from, and how do you think we can, having identified that, how can we resolve that to truly live in an environment where we as Jews of color do not feel as if we're being marginalized or being subjected to this type of treatment?
One, I believe it's cognitive dissonance, where if every year we can celebrate, the holiday of Purim, where during that story in the Megillah, we're talking about the Jewish communities that existed from India to Ethiopia that weren't destroyed. We're talking about the Jews that lived in those communities that, were survived, were under threat and survived. And that's, from, Russia to Poland, or Germany to Poland, or Spain to Morocco, those particular communities. The people that look like they could come from those communities, and those communities themselves don't disappear when you close the last page of the Megillah. So if you can consistently, annually celebrate this holiday where Jews that live in brown countries, in brown Jews, were sort of the focal point, to then turn, and when you see someone that is a brown Jew, it's like, how are you Jewish? That doesn't make any sense. It's like the cognitive dissonance there. It's also, I feel, sort of a protective sort of guilt mechanism where people are just inherently, not necessarily in Jewish spaces, just globally, where there's sort of a reluctance or an unwillingness to acknowledge that one can be oppressed but still oppress other people. And we see that a lot in the dialogues of, oh, Jews aren't white. Well, what Jews are asking that question, right? I'm not asking that question. Drake isn't asking that question. Tracy Ellis Ross isn't asking that question. Liz Cho isn't asking that question. So the people who are asking that question are generally white Jews. So then the question is, or the statement is, white Jews aren't white. which then answers itself. Because I feel it would be just as ridiculous for me to say, oh, I'm not black, I'm black passing, or I'm provisionally black, or conditionally black. But phenotypically, I am a black person. If you can say that black Jews are black, you can say that Asian Jews are Asian, you can say that Indian Jews are Indian, why can't you say that white Jews are white? And I think that speaks back to the guilt where whiteness is seen as inherently a negative value judgment, where it isn't. It's just a phenotypical, observable statement of fact. And whiteness is also a spectrum, because the pushback is, Jews, white Jews don't have privileges the same way as, white people do. There's only one class of white person that has full privilege. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, heterosexual males. White LGBTQ people don't have full privilege. White women don't have full privilege. White Catholics don't have full privilege. No one's talking about full privilege. Privilege is a spectrum. And on the spectrum, you are part of the spectrum of whiteness. You're complaining that you don't have two eyes, because people with two eyes say that you can't see it because you have one eye, but you're talking to people who don't have eyes at all. You still have a sight privilege, just don't have a full sight privilege, but to say you don't have any sight privilege is disingenuous.
With that in mind, one comment which I heard you made in a different interview is you talked about how people want to vote for Trump because he's good for Israel, and you sort of talked about, what about voting for somebody because they're good for the community that you are? And so, with that in mind, I'm just wondering, when I go into the synagogue or the community center, I notice that there's a complete focus on a dialogue of anti-Semitism and support for Israel, but there does not seem to be any room for anything for introspection in the Jewish community in terms of how we treat each other as Jews and what our relationship is to the community. Relative to, for example, in the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, during the 60s, there was many Jews who participated in supporting, the need for justice, people who got involved in NAACP during this foundation. So do you think that this sort of focus that we in Israel and anti-Semitism, that there's not enough room being allowed for a dialogue within ourselves, particularly as it pertains to racism within the Jewish community?
I think this speaks back to the reluctance of acknowledging the place of whiteness in American Judaism when it comes to this. There's the narrative, blacks and Jews worked together, during civil rights, and Jews left the movement. Well, what Jews are you talking about? You're not talking about Charles McDew, who's part of SNCC. You're not talking about Judas Lester, African-American Jews. You're talking about white Jews. So if you're refusing to acknowledge that piece, you're going to have this clash that continuously happens. And even when it comes to the civil rights movement, there's that sort of, it's lionized and mythologized how, cohesive it was. It's ignoring the fact that during that time, Jewish leaders were saying this is only going to be sort of a finite sort of collaboration, and we are going to split apart. It's obfuscating the fact that, yes, Jews were disproportionately sort of involved in the civil rights movement when compared to other ethnicities. That doesn't mean that Jews as a whole disproportionately were involved in civil rights. Of the people involved in civil rights, most were Jews. That does not mean that most of the Jewish community was for civil rights. Even the famous march with Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, in the background of one of those pictures, there's a Jewish shop owner or Jewish shop, and that Jewish shop owner, very notoriously, even according to Rabbi Heschel's daughter, Susanna, was not for integration, not for civil rights, and that's like the base of the South. It's ignoring things like the secession crisis. BJ in New York, Rabbi Rufal Morris had an entire speech saying, as much as I loathe to say a good word for the institution of slavery, God and the truth must prevail, and slavery is essentially legal, which is so flawed and so disingenuous on so many different levels. And those sort of those elements that exist and are just not addressed or are denied that they're even there. The fact that by 1860, 1/4 of the American Jewish South were slave owners. All these pieces and parcels that are just ignored. And they feed back in sort of like a recursive loop of resentment and disingenuity that just, you can't build a structure on quicksand. That's what
Well
these
said.
basically are.
So, in terms of the racism that we as Jews of color experience, to what extent, if any, is there a responsibility for that racism by the culture of rabbis at various synagogues that maybe knowingly or unknowingly being a lightning rod for racism? Because I know, for example, in New York, I have speak to people who are Jews of color who cannot go in a synagogue because they're being blocked because they are a so-called Jew of color. So to what extent do you regard the so-called, white rabbis or, whatever the more appropriate term, Caucasian, or, whatever the more appropriate term is, to what extent are the rabbis need to be a part of the dialogue that's necessary for us to overcome a lot of this racism that we experience as Jews of color?
That needs to be acknowledging when things are racially off or have been racially screwed for centuries. And acknowledging that, some of our greatest, figures, some of our greatest rabbis, lawmakers were still people and had flaws. And very frequently that flaw was racism. Rambam, Maimonides, amazing law, minds, Mishneh Torah, codification. Our calendar system is essentially based on, what Rambam decided this is which year we're going to follow. But over in Moreh Nevuchim, he says those who cannot attain higher spiritual values are the black colored people and those like them in their climates. In the order of created things, they are above a monkey but less than a man. We have to address that and say, yeah, that was a bad thing. It doesn't mean throwing everything that Rambam ever said out of the water. It doesn't mean that everything is wrong, but you have to be able to parse and take these things out. The curse of Ham, we have to acknowledge that that's not something that's inherent to what the Talmud is actually saying in Sanhedrin 180. It's a comment that Rashi made, a connection that he made, and now that's quoted as what the Talmud says. It's also ignoring that in his time, people fought against him. Ramban in the Ibn Ezra specifically said there are those who think that black colored people are cursed to be slaves because of Ham, but we see this isn't true because the first king of the earth was Nimrod, and a slave can't be a king. We have to have the fullness of these dialogues, and when there aren't the plethora of the multiracial, multi-ethnic family that is Judaism, we're not addressing the full picture, we're not teaching the full picture, we're not even seeing what the full picture is. It's frustrating. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely a lot of frustration, as far as Jews of color. One sort of insight which I wanted to get your comment on it, just from my own personal experience. In reading about, racism as it pertains to the Jewish community, I have noticed, just speaking from my own personal experience, that there is a focus on racism as it pertains to Orthodox Judaism, as if, and it almost seems to me that Orthodox Judaism is being singled out, as if there's not this going on in other parts of Judaism. From my own experience, I actually find that when I have contact with a Orthodox rabbi, I found for myself more of a sense of tolerance for rabbis who are relatively conservative or Orthodox relative to, Reform and Reconstructionist rabbis. So I was wondering if you might have an insight in terms of any comments that you have out there for people who have experienced this spectrum of Judaism that exists, because I just feel as if for myself, when I read literature, there's this mentality that, oh yes, Orthodox Judaism, because they're conservatism and they're going to be more exclusive, whereas I find from my own experience that I find more of the racism, more direct in the Reconstructionist Judaism, Reform Judaism, relative to conservative, and Orthodox. So I was wondering if you have any sort of insights on that.
That's a huge myth. There's this sort of perception that Orthodoxy is, this, cloistered, insular, backwards sort of space, and, heterodoxy is progressive, liberal, more progressive on issues of race. But the difference is really the difference between like northern and southern racism. Like the denominational lines, like the Mason-Dixon line, how are you Jewish? You get an Orthodox space is the exact same as so what's your story that you get in like Reform places? They're asking they're saying the same thing. I don't think you belong here. Explain to me how you do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the repeated experience that I've gotten sort of growing up, from university, going to Jewish associations. How did you get here? Is constantly, being approached for that question. You have to constantly justify yourself. And when I first, younger, I would sort of view this as sort of humorous, a humorous element of, going to various Jewish functions. But as I've become more mature and stuff, it's become more sort of annoying and, and I feel more of a need to speak out against it. I know one comment that you did have in another interview is you had mentioned that people, basically, you start off as Jewish color, and as you get older, you're more and more likely to leave the community. I was wondering if you might have any insights on that, additional insights.
Hopefully it's not as true now as it was when I first said that almost 2 decades ago at this point.
Yeah.
Because we are seeing that the larger cohort of Jews of color in this country are of the younger generation. And hopefully that will trend into the older generation in 20, 30, 40 years from now. But it's wearying. It wears people down. Like for me personally, I like to address with humor. How are you Jewish? Fine, thanks. How are you Jewish?
I like that one.
You don't look. Oh, you don't look like a jackass. I guess we were both. Which again speaks to that inherent assumption of whiteness, because you're saying Jews aren't white, but you look at Jews of color suspiciously because we aren't white. So make it make sense. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too. Another tactic I like to personally use is to answer the question that they're answering, not the question that I know that they're asking, right? They see me and say, oh, what are those? What they're asking is, why are you wearing them? What I answer, oh, well, these are fringes. Every Orthodox Jew should wear. Oh, no, I know what they. So then what? So then what are you asking? Why are you? Sometimes they pick it up and they understand, oh, I'm sorry, or they'll keep going until they, walk me through until you say the racist thing that's happening in your head, which is why you're asking me. Like there was a video I just responded to over on Instagram a couple of days ago, where it's this guy who goes to an airport. He's like, oh, he's a black guy. He's in Zitzis. I saw this guy over here. He's wearing Zitzis. Hell, I had to come and say, what's the deal over here? I'm like, what do you mean, what's the deal over here? Like, it's a guy in Zitzis. It should be pretty obvious. Like, if I see an Asian guy in a pastor's collar, I'm not going to see what's the deal over here. Obviously, he's a pastor. And I see he's wearing a pastor's collar. And so, sort of the comments on that, oh, we do this to everyone. No, you don't, because if it was a white guy there, you wouldn't be asking him the same question. You wouldn't be like, what's going on over here? What's the deal? Like, oh, we love Baal Teshuvahs or people get more religious. Well, yeah, if this was a white guy who was Baal Teshuvah, you wouldn't know it because you wouldn't have come over to him because you'd just be a white guy and sits it. Oh, we're just celebrating diversity. It's very interesting how Jewish diversity and when Jewish diversity gets celebrated. I've noted it only gets sort of put at the forefront when, Jews are sort of under attack from some outside threat. And it's like, oh, look at the diversity of Judaism. You're not just attacking white people, you're attacking Asians and sort of. But during the rest of the year, some of us can't go into shuls, right? Or I was in Philadelphia for Jewish priorities. And I was talking about, people who when I was stopped from going into a shul just 2 days before October 7th. You don't look Jewish. What about me doesn't look Jewish? Right?
That's so rude.
And he's like, well, you don't look like us. Well, what do you expect? Well, if you're saying we don't look like you and we should expect to, get treated this way, then keep our faces off the posters of, who got killed in these terrorist attacks in Israel. Keep our faces out of, here the IDF, that we're not just props for you. Like Darren Horn has a book, people love dead Jews. Well, if that's true, then I would say American Jews love dead Jews of color. They love putting our faces forward. But if you have a video about the Jewish future, there's maybe two faces there. You're talking about Jewish sustainability. Maybe there's one of us in the background. When we talk about, let's go to Israel. We have Israel. Israel's space safe. Well, some of us can't get on the plane or off the plane. I have a colleague of mine, he was going to El Al. He wasn't allowed on the plane until he went to the car and got his white Ashkenazi mother and brought her in, and then they believed he was Jewish. Or people who are just grilled and can't get off the plane unless they name what their bar mitzvah parsha was, and say the first few lines, or etc. So it's also, what Jews are we talking about that Israel is a safe space for?
Yeah, definitely. So, because I know people who in Israel, who are Sephardic, who said, they go in Israel, they get called nigger and all this terrible stuff. They get treated as a lower totem pole, and in Israel. And definitely a lot of mistreatment,
Like open racism.
Open racism, It's a lot of hypocrisy and racism and stuff like that. And,
in shul, on Shabbat, in my tallit, someone asked me if I'm Jewish. I'm just cosplaying. Don't mind me.
Definitely. I mean, it comes out. It comes out in such a spontaneous, open way and stuff that as if they are completely disconnected with the statements that they make that most people would be connected with in any other religious, background.
I just want to say, as a Christian, nobody asks me, are you really Christian? I'm brown, I'm Indian, I'm Christian. That's it. It's interesting. You're right. It doesn't seem to happen as much in other religions. So, for some reason, Judaism and Jews do this. It's interesting. My perspective. Yeah.
But you can't both. You can't brown people are on the weird suspect list and say, hey, we have no claim on whiteness. Because that's what's happening. That's what you're doing. It's the same hierarchy that happens in Judaism that happens everywhere else, where there's white people at the top of the totem pole, brown people on the sliding scale of acceptability, and black people on the bottom. So let's stop pretending that things are socially acting different. Let's stop pretending that if you and I got into a fight, in terms of a mainstream, people aren't going to say, hey, they're two Jews fighting on the corner, all right? And there's a white guy and a black guy, or maybe a Jew and a black guy, depending on how visible we're looking. When I used to write, people would ask me, are you black first or are you Jewish first? Well, that's an interesting question. Let's say it's a Friday night, and you see me running down the block. Are you saying, hey, obviously that Jew is late for Friday night services? Or are you thinking, did that black guy steal something? If you see me walking down the block, with my kippah on, are you going to be like, hey, that Jew has dark skin? Or are you going to say, what's that thing on that black guy's head? Or why is that black guy wearing a yarmulke? Don't be disingenuous.
Yeah. I think that with that in mind, definitely there is this sort of the ignorance that you deal with with people in the Jewish community. But I also find that even when there's the people who are definitely regard themselves as so-called egalitarian or so-called progressive, and we know that they're Jews of color, and they have all the talk of equality, but when time comes down to it, you can tell they are still perceiving you at a lower part of the totem pole while not consciously saying that. And the way, and my litmus test, for example, an example of that was, for example, in Canada, there was somebody by the Green Party. She was Jewish and also black, Anna Marie May. She was black, and she got into issues, political challenges, and I didn't see any sort of groundswell of support from the so-called white Jewish community to come to her aid if that she would have obtained if she was a white Jewish female. And I think that from my own sense as a so-called Jew of color, I find that in terms of just organizing community events, if I was a Muslim trying to do something for the community, people who are Muslim, even though they might have a prejudice against me black, I would have an impact in trying to bring together Muslims, regardless of what prejudice they had. If I was a black Catholic or a black Protestant, I would still get listened to in some level. I would still have support, even though there's racism in those communities. But I find as a black Jew and stuff like that, the most you can expect is politeness. But if you're in trouble, or if you are trying to organize something as a Jew or organize something in the community, I think that the black Jew and a Jew of color is completely marginalized, and completely marginalized. And the most you can expect is some politeness, but don't expect that you're going to get the same impact, no matter how educated and aware the person is that you are Jew, an equal Jewish person at the end. There's black Jews. So do you have any sort of insights on that? Because I feel that as a black Jew, I feel ultra marginalized and stuff like that. And that's part of that sort of feeling of alienation. Even with people who view themselves as egalitarian, they still treat you in this sort of marginalized way. So do you have any insights on that?
So many insights. I don't even know where to begin. First, when it comes to marginalization, it's wild that Jews of color are marginalized as much as they are in the Jewish community. Because if you think of Jewish Americans in the greater American population, Jews make up less than 0.2% of the American Jewish population. Jews of color make from 10 to 20% of the Jewish American population. So proportionally, Jews of color make up more of American Jews than American Jews make up of Americans.
Wow.
They don't have nearly the same amount of visibility that Jews have in America in general in the Jewish community. For a few years, the joke going around amongst, thought leaders and movers and shakers in the Jew of color space is that Jewish institutions are far more likely to sponsor a Jewish organic farm than they are a Jew of color initiative. Cognitive dissonance. The URJ, very famously, 2019, 2020, they had their conference where they backed reparations for African Americans, made it like a cornerstone and, a priority. At that same convention, Maragad, a Jew of color, was a presenter. She has an entire Facebook post, like delineating her experiences when she first went up to get her name tag. She was told that the real Maragad needs to pick it up, because obviously it's not this black woman. I am the real Maragad. No apology. When she's in elevators, people are like, what are you here for? I'm here to present. What could you possibly present on? At a certain point, she had to be escorted. This is the same conference. Supporting reparations for African Americans, standing by, doing progressive values. At that same conference, a Jew of color was made to feel so unsafe that she had to be escorted at that same conference by security, and her children and husband had to stay in the hotel room because it was not safe for them there. How do you hold those two things at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a very disturbing experience, having to, whether you're the kids or from your parents or from anybody who is, for anybody who is socially aware. I mean, that's a disturbing experience. How do you think that, what is the solution for us as Jews of color to redress that? Do we need to create our own institutions, or should we focus on some sort of organized way of trying to how can we best deal with this sort of ongoing challenge without, assimilating and just saying, I don't want to have anything to do with Judaism. I'm just going to drift off in another community.
One, I can empathize with that, when you say, let's just go somewhere else. Like, what about being Jewish or about being black has ever been about being easy, right? You have to choose your heart. So it's not going to be easier over there. Any easier is going to be over here. Secondly, there's multiple ways to, we're not fighting a battle on a single front. There's multiple ways to, so you need people to build their own, people to sort of integrate, people to be on boards here, people to create boards over here, people to do writing, people to do marching, people to do speaking. Everyone has a piece to bring because, again, it's not just one sphere or realm that these issues exist in. So whatever you're doing, that's the right thing to do. That's going to help. even me personally being involved with a little plug here, Lishma Publication Society, where I'm going to be publishing fish.
Rabbi Rishon, you were talking, what sort of initiatives that you're sort of doing that, whether it's books or other community endeavors that people can learn, be enlightened about, and get some more information about trying to be a part of the solution in terms of racism and getting more involved in the Jewish community in New York or in general?
Cycling back to what I said earlier about textual knowledge, where there needs to be sort of a return to what the actual original texts are, because a sort of problem across Judaism in general, not necessarily regarding race specifically, is not going back to what the original texts are, but referring to the most famous commentator on that text and what they said the text says. For example, Me'am Lois by Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, excellent work. However, he quotes sources and says that they say things that they don't. Very specifically when it comes to Ham, he quotes, Tanhuma, and he says that Ham's punishment is that his lips became red, like his hair became kinky, and his lips became thick and gross like those of a Negro, right? That's not what Tanhuma says. Tanhuma says his eyes became red, his hair became singed, and his lips became loose and watery. Those are two different physical descriptions that we'll have at the end of that. But no one goes back to Tanhuma. They just go to Yaakov Kuli. And no one goes back to the Talmud. They just go to Rashi and says, oh, this means that Ham is where he was cursed to be black. And so Lishma Publication Society, which is an initiative that I'm involved in, is not only just race, but also gender, things like orientation, things that have always been in the text, where to present them, one in the original text with their original translations and etc., but also presenting the rest of the Jewish story as part of the curriculum, not, electives. I believe they have an Indiegogo that's at least going to be up by the time this airs, so people can sort of donate there. But Esh Shechara is sort of my main initiative right now, which is a commentary on all of the weekly parshiot, which here's where race comes into play, here's where gender comes into play, here's where orientation comes into play. Or it's not, an agenda in either direction or how people want to paint it. This is what our texts say. This is what's here. This is how we have shown up or how we've existed. It doesn't mean everything's going to be, flowers and rainbows and everything is always accepted and everything else, but I feel it means a lot more to see that you've always been part of a story, regardless of how you show up, as opposed to being told that you weren't there at all and now you're just a later addition, or now we need to find a way to fit you into this construct and this space.
And what does it have? Is there a website that people can go to get more information that you can spell out for us?
There's my Facebook page at Manish Channel, on my Facebook Manish Channel page, where you can find more information there. You can find me on social media, The Real Manish Channel on Instagram and on Threads, on Twitter. So those are sort of the basic things. You can find me there. You can email me. I'm always emailable. You can find me in those sort of spaces.
Awesome. And you also have at least one book that you have published. Can you kind of remind our viewers out there what the name of that book is and where they can buy a copy of your book?
So there's actually, I have a copy right here. There's Boats of a Unicorn, which is my first book about 14 years ago. Oh. You can find me in Essay in Jewish Priorities. Mm-hmm. There's also Ariel Sampson, Freelance Rabbi, which is fiction. There's Haggadah, the Rishon Legacy Illuminated Haggadah that's out there. And more things that I'm going to be publishing through Lishma Publication Society that, again, will be starting in the fall and maybe something a little bit earlier. Stay tuned. There might be some surprises.
Awesome. So we'll be publishing the links below our interview today of each link of where people can get your book and be more sort of informed, whether they're Jews or whether they're people who just want to learn about, get some more insights from a Jewish perspective. We'll be posting those links to all your books below this video. Is there any sort of comment, perspective that you wanted to mention, Rabbi Rishon, before we sign out today in terms of as somebody of Jewish color or just somebody who is Jewish that you wanted to share with our sort of viewers out there and listeners?
A question that I get a lot when I'm presenting, when I'm writing, when I'm speaking is, well, what do we do now? How do we fix this? How do we do whatever? And I think it's shockingly simple, even, right? Because we've all gone to junior high school, and it was terrible for all of us, right? We all hated it. We know how we felt othered. We know how we would have wanted people to show up. We know how we would have liked to have been seen. Just do that. Do that. Try to create a world or interact with people that your junior high school self would have appreciated, that would have made that time actually enjoyable. That's all we need to do. You know what it's like to be an other. You know what it's like to be the oldest person in the room, the only person with blonde hair, the tallest person, the youngest person, the only woman, the only man. You know how it feels when you're that other and how people show up for you and how you would like people to show up. Do that. Just that simple.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. That's definitely great words of wisdom, Rabbi Rishon. Anything you wanted to say, Santosh, to add to that?
Oh no, it's amazing, how much you've been through, but you keep going. It makes your faith stronger, and I really admire that. And hopefully, the future always looks bright. So.
Well, I'm not in the habit of letting terrible people run me out of my own house.
That's good. It's inspiring.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Rabbi Rishon, for being a special guest on the Etiquette Show. We are grateful that you could share your insights and wisdom to all of us to make all of our lives better, whether we're Jews or non-Jews. And we look forward to, and we encourage people to get your copies of your book, to get more of your insights and perspectives that we'll be posting below this interview today. So thank you very much again, Rabbi Rishon, for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thank you. It's been a great talk, guys.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi. Okay.
Take care.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I just wanted to thank the Rabbi for that amazing discussion we just had on sort of as someone who is a Black Jewish, as a rabbi and stuff, and the experiences of discrimination and identity and being Jewish. That was a very informative discussion by the Rabbi, which takes us to our next segment, which we kind of talk about. I thought, it's useful, and yourself, Santosh, talk about sort of observations of spirituality, where we think we are and where we think we're going, and from a spiritual direction in society. So do you have any sort of thoughts on spirituality and society today?
Well, I'm seeing like two extremes going on. There's either like a push for extreme materialism, where these people are just like constantly bragging about how much they have or how much money they have, how many blah blah. And then, but on the other extreme, I'm also seeing that there's a lot of I don't know if you've noticed, there's a lot of near-death experiences channels going on. It has been a huge explosion of people having. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry about that.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, no problem. Okay, do you want to start that again, or?
Yeah, start again, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. She wanted to do the litter box real quick, but anyway.
Okay, no problem. I can start again. Okay, no problem. Okay, so...
Right. 3, 2, 1.
Awesome. So that was an amazing discussion we just had with the Rabbi. We were talking about sort of being Jewish, being Black and Jewish, the Black identity in relationship to Judaism and spirituality and community and discrimination and experiences of racism. So that was so I thought that sort of takes us to our next segment, in which we talk about spirituality and society. So I just want to what has been your experiences of spirituality and society? Like, where do you think we are as a species, this where we're at these days? Like, where do you think we're headed? And is there any perspectives you have on that?
Well, like I said before the interview, we were talking, like, everything seems to be going in an extreme right now. Either there's this push for extreme materialism, where like the rich are getting like richer and like just the extravagance, and some people are so poor like they can't even afford even if they're working at 2 jobs, they're still living in their car. Or there seems to be an extremism in materialist point of view, where the gap between the rich and the poor, it seems to keep growing. But at the same time, on the other extreme, I'm seeing that there's a lot of this is explosion of spirituality going on, like with a lot of I don't know if you noticed, there's like a lot of near-death experience channels on YouTube lately, where people are having this extreme spiritual awakening, realizing that the material is not, all of this is an illusion, or they're realizing that not everything that they learned in science or even religion is the same as what they actually experience in the afterlife, the brief experience of the afterlife. And I personally have had a lot of spiritual awakenings with. There's a lot of videos on astral projection. Now, I'm not promoting these videos, but it seems like I don't know if you noticed that there's a lot of this. You can get out of your body and realize all of this is just an illusion. Or there's the other extreme. How to get rich, how to get more rich. You know, have you noticed that there's an extreme in that yourself?
Yes, I do. I definitely noticed that. As you mentioned, there's more of a gap between the rich and the poor, and sort of a sense of materialism among the rich and a sense of spirituality. The only thing with me is that I try to avoid. I try to only use YouTube as a entertainment for strictly entertainment.
Okay.
I have to be careful here, but I try to avoid YouTube for critical news. So I try to get my other sources of critical news from elsewhere. So trends in YouTube, I don't necessarily view to be front and center in terms of as a gauge necessarily what's going on. I mostly view certain things as YouTube as what is part of their promotional algorithm. But with that in mind, definitely I see that, and I share that sort of sense that you're seeing as well. With that said, one of the things which are increasingly troubling to me is this disparity is going on, but at the same time, I'm extremely disturbed, like so many people out there, with these proliferation of war, which is going all over the place, and the apparent push by the so-called mainstream media to fan the flames of these wars as being righteous. At the same time, we have increasing poverty, increasing social dislocation. The media, the mainstream media, doesn't seem to be paying attention to the growing, worsening disparity that is taking place. People sleeping on the street, eating out of garbage cans. I shared that experience before with you, Santosh, where I was eating and at a place, and I saw a relatively respectable looking gentleman. He went to the garbage and started eating food from the garbage and stuff like that. I was disturbed by this. I offered him $10. He said no, he didn't want the $10. He didn't need it. He's just concerned about food waste. I mean, it just seemed to me this increasing psychosis of people being pushed into scarcity mode, where we have people heart struggling to survive, people either just struggling to pay rent, struggling, pushing on the brink. At the same time, the media doesn't seem to be concerned about all the day-to-day problems. I remember the media being concerned about these issues. Now they're only concerned about this prism of war, these prisms of, it's good for us to be spending billions of dollars into a war, which is taking us in the direction of World War III. So it's just this. So this is what's disturbing to me. And I think that the spirituality that we see, that, these mass protests, the spirituality are people who feel disempowered by trying to do all these protests, trying to protest, and not being heard by the media, not being heard by the holes of power, and being disenfranchised. While we're spiraling into this sort of descent we see going on here. I saw one headline by one newspaper today that started speculating on nuclear war, like they were speculating on whether a sports team should win or not. I mean, it was just like a very cold, clinical kind of article, like, oh, we should all potentially expect nuclear war, and this sort of mentality. I find that this mentality is completely antithetical to the human consciousness. It's like as if we're being pushed by some strange agenda.
Yeah, it's like the Hunger Games, where it's all becoming like it's becoming so like human life has almost become cheap to some of these powerful, extreme powerful people. And you're right. I don't know if they're pushing it because all this war to distract the people, or is it like maybe they want more people to enlist in the military so that they can be taken care. I don't know. People are desperate, like they're not able to find jobs or make a living. Maybe they're hoping that they can enlist in them in the military. This is kind of reminiscent, maybe closer in World War II time. Do you think we're like history is repeating itself, or possibly, or?
No, well, there's always a danger of history repeating itself. And I wasn't around with World War II, but I'm a student of history, and my understanding and my sort of appreciation of what was going on before World War II is that there was a trepidation about the world's being pushed into World War II. There was a real apprehension about it. There was much more of a media is much more front and center as a concern. Now the media these days are completely detached from the whole, and are just fanning the flames of trying to make the whole process of armaments and putting money and into this war machine that's taking place, as how some are being righteous, and then we have this situation, which is also equally bizarre, this whole situation in the United States, which is taking place also in Canada, is taking place in England, where we have these open borders where you have people coming in from Mexico, and why isn't the media talking about how this is affecting Americans? How is these people coming through the border affecting America? But instead of paying attention to these very important issues of war, how it affects social justice, how is our sense of social justice being affected by people who are coming through across the border? This is happening in England too. You're having these problems happening because you have this so-called open doors policy where people are coming in and dislocating jobs, creating crime, because again, there's a lot of wonderful immigrants. I'm not saying that immigrants are criminal. Great majority of immigrants are amazing people, wonderful people. What I'm saying is that because of this open border policies, people are slipping through the cracks and stuff, and because of that, in places like like New York City, you have all kinds of problems which are happening that need not to happen. So why is the media labeling these fundamental and obvious concerns? Oh, that's right-wing people. Right-wing people are concerned about, immigration, and right-wing people, this weird, bizarre mentality that is escaping the fact that look what's going on. Look what's happening in New York City. Look what's happening with social dislocation. People who are more poverty, more crime. Apparently rape has gone up as well. Just terrible things going on the subway. We need to focus on what is happening and the real human impact of policies which seem to be contributing to that. And this idea where the media is just ignoring that and allowing these to get worse is completely bizarre to me.
Yeah, it seems like the left and the right are just like, they have all these talking points and they're just arguing amongst themselves. Whatever politician, like they're treating the politicians like they're celebrities instead of actual people that are there to fix. They're supposed to serve us, right? And I think, I don't know, I always think the left and the right should work together. This is my personal opinion when it comes to politics. it's like the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain need to kind of merge together to solve the problems, whatever problem it is. If it's homelessness, we need to address the issue rather than just, just use it in an argument or make it into like some kind of a debate all the time rather than, taking action to solve it. So, the cost of living, of course, is the biggest factor, I always think, because as the rent goes up or the cost of food goes up, even people who were not homeless before might become homeless if it keeps going in that trajectory. So something needs to be addressed. Either there needs to be like a rent cap, which I think some people are implementing in some cities, which is good. So hopefully, for every material problem, there's a spiritual solution. So hopefully we can all come together on that. And
we have to, in my view, like you said, we have to stop this left-right wing narrative. We have to focus on human solutions to human problems. This left-right wing narrative is a part of divide and rule politics. And my concern is that if a small fraction, we have in the United States, the proliferation of these tent cities, in California, different parts of the West, growing poverty, this poverty could be completely erased with a small fraction of money, which is being put into all these crazy wars that's pushing us to nuclear Armageddon. This is absolutely ridiculous and stuff like that. And then we have all sorts of politicians which are saying, we should put Ukraine in NATO. The directive of the NATO is any body which attacks NATO attacks all the allies, and that will, and based upon that narrative would lead us immediately to a nuclear Armageddon. So this whole narrative, which is being pushed by the mainstream media, that focuses on war, that focuses on billions of dollars being invested into a direction that's taking us to a direction of completely destroying 95% of life on the planet, is completely dysfunctional, and is taking away, from a practical standpoint, money being put into the social problems taking place in New York City, across America. There's no excuse for all this poverty and stuff like that going on, and while staying, and while at the same time pushing us to the
that if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
We love NYC.